Yahweh, thank you so much. I love speaking about this, and I'm want to first of all say thank you, Nyawagoa, to Mike Mitchell for the opening prayer. I want to say, Nyawagoa, I loved your words, Davin. I think as we begin this journey forward together, trying to become who we were and are, I think that getting back to a state of harmony and love is a powerful message, and I can say that that's certainly something that would come from the Haudenosaunee people. We would be in total agreement with that, about balance and harmony and love and caring about each other and holding each other up. So your message was very important, it's significant, and we have to do as a teacher forever. I would say repetition, repetition, repetition. And I would also say practice, 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 because Clan Mother told me you have to do it. You have to experience it to know it and to teach it. You can't just read it. This is our way. We practice, we repeat, and we listen, and we open our hearts, and we learn, and we share. We share the gifts that we have, building on the strengths that we have. So I'm grateful that I'm on the territory, and I want to give thanks for being, we're working from home today. So I'm working out of the Ottawa area. And so I'm on Algonquin territory. So I want to say Nyagoa and give recognition and acknowledgement to being on this territory. And I want to also, our offices are in Akwesasne, give thanks, it's Mohawk territory, to our office location. And I want to give thanks and acknowledgement to all the territories for all of the participants. Should you not have that opportunity, but being virtual, we're all coming from very different nations, places of being, where we have grown up and embraced the land, and that's where our traditions and customs and practices come from. And so I just want to give acknowledgement and thanks for that. So today, I get to talk about structural readiness and taking control of First Nations education. I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to share with you, and we will post it online. Should you wish to download it, please do so and take it and use it as you wish. These are thoughts of an older woman who is Mohawk, who has lived in both worlds. I've straddled both, brought up in English mainly, but on reserve still. And that was a unique experience that I'm going to be putting thoughts down on paper and writing a paper about it, because I think it's important that we begin to do that, so that people can take it then and share it in there if they want to, as an experience, because every experience every person has is unique and worthy of recognition and worthy of seeing and hearing and participating. So I'm really glad, and I better stay to my topic because I'll go off track. So can we have the PowerPoint, please? Thank you. Yeah, this is about education and taking control of First Nations education according to our way, First Nations First Nations way. Whatever it is you come from, whatever culture, whatever nation, which means over 684, according to the statistics from Assembly of First Nations. So if there are that many communities, we're rife with diversity. We're all different. We know that. None of us are the same. We're all different. We have different teachings. We have different ceremonies. We have different songs. We have different traditions. We come like that. That's who we are. And it's who we've always been. And so now sharing that with everybody in our way, in our words, is important. We're in the time where people need to hear our voices, need to hear our stories. And so let's look at how we're doing that internally, because we're learning how to do that. This is not easy. This is changing how we look at the world and our mindsets. So next slide, please. So this is the FNEA, First Nations Education Administrators Association's journey. It's rooted in First Nations traditions, ceremonies, peoples, and communities. We're going to look at, that's my topic today. How wonderful we get to talk about this together. It's about a lens and a mindset. It's about structural readiness. What does that mean to our people, and how can we work with that and make it our story and not someone else's? How do we do that? And what are the topics for that? And then it's always about building relationships. It's always about partnerships. I think we've, as Indigenous people, as First Nations, as Haudenosaunee, we've always had relationships with others. And I know the Peacemaker, when we were developing the Tree of Peace and our Confederacy, went around talking to people everywhere, all the different First Nations before the settlers came to us. We were busy doing that then, negotiating and becoming, instead of 6 separate nations, we were becoming a confederacy, because we were going to work together and build together. We were stronger and yet respect each other's ways. And so partnerships and relationships and building them is not new. This is part of us. It's always been a part of us. And if you dream and allow your dreaming and to come through, your ancestors will give you messages. And so we're always connected to the people who are part of us and our bloodlines and in dreams. And so this is certainly a Haudenosaunee belief. And so our dreams become very significant to us, because we get messages from our ancestors and from the Creator of what we need to do. So we just have to ask and we will get a message. We want to talk about the existing environment that we're in today. Why is it so tough today? It's different. We're in a really different environment, and we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about what FNEA does. I think most of you all know. You've helped form us, and we love our board of directors, because they are the people who lobbied so hard to get us set up and to get us functioning. And we listen really carefully to messages and what they want us to do. And so we're trying to keep true to the spirit of what First Nations education administrators in First Nations communities, all 684 across Canada, want us to do. And we want to focus again on balance, connectedness, and all our relations. This is about our traditions. So we're going to start with talking about that journey with a lens and a mindset. And we're going to close with that balance, connectedness, and all our relations, some comments around that, because I think that's the journey that we're all on, and it's new for us. And so making changing mindsets is hard work. You have to build a whole new set of dendrites in your brain, and it's fact. So we know that it's not easy, but we can do it. It's doable. And if this is our passion, we can make it happen. We have always been passionate about our own ways, always. Next slide, please. So what is this lens and mindset? Well, a lens, it's like a, in a camera, it's even in your eyes. It's how you view the world, how you view your country, how you view your region and your community, your nation, and even yourself, how you see yourself. It's about our beliefs. It's about our values. It's about the assumptions or presuppositions that we make. It's the ideas that float around in our head and what we dream about. This is how it's a worldview, and it is certainly something we grew up with. It's been building in our brain. Everything that we ever experience is on a dendrite in our brain. And that if we press the right button, we can access all those memories. And that's how we get back to it. So it's in our brain. It's like our virtual computer. It's like our inside us. And at the back of our brain there's a filter of all the experiences that you've ever had. And it is ongoing. And that's why you can have dreams and memories. And so we connect to all that's there. And so really important to know what your worldview is. And so when you start looking at yourself and your identity, how much of I'm definitely been brought up and got a lot of Western ways because that's the world I grew up in. And see, some of that is learned, it's all learned behavior. And so we can unlearn and relearn and create new dendrites to access, and if we want to make change. So that's important, we can do it. Mindset, well, this is about your attitude, how you look at that, and whether you're positive or whether you see the cup half full or half empty, a positive or negative. This is about how you act, your behavior, what you're doing to actualize who you are. What are you doing? And so what action to get a solution are you taking? What are your results? Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not so good. And so when you perform, when you take action, you have to assess, well, do I want to stay on that path? It was good. Or do I not want to stay on that path? It wasn't so good. You keep doing the same thing the same way, you're going to get the same results. And so we want you to start thinking about this and about your attitude and how you look at the world and how you can make change if you want to. And so you'll see the diagram says there's a fixed mindset which sees it black and white. This is the way it is, and it's not going to change. And if you see it that way, you're going to stay that way. The brain accepts that. That's your mindset. If you believe you can, you can. If you believe you cannot, you will not. So it's what the messages you send to your brain, to yourself, and what are the mantras? What are your affirmations that you say to yourself? You can say, I did a good job. It wasn't perfect. I could have done better there, but I still did a good job. I still got the message across, and that's okay. Or you could have said, oh, I really screwed it up. I don't want to do that anymore. I'm not going to do that anymore. You could say that. So it's what the messages you say to yourself. And I just say, you know what? I'm a Mohawk. I'm doing the best I can. I'm trying to make change. I love myself. I love my identity. I love being Mohawk. I love our people. I love our communities. I love what they're doing. And I care about them. And I care enough, and I'm passionate enough that I want to make change so everybody can move forward and become who they want to be. And they might not want to be traditional. They might want to be more in the Western world. And you know what? That's okay. That's okay. That's your choice. As long as you're making the choice that works best for you and what you want. And if you have a fixed mindset and only see black and white and don't think change is possible, that's the way it will stay. But if you have a growth mindset, you can plant seeds. You can share your gifts. You can do anything that you want. It is possible. You just got to feed it and nurture it and build on those foundations of strength that you have, those gifts that you were given by the Creator, those gifts that you share with others, and others will benefit from that, and you will benefit from that, because an interaction is always two-way. It's never one way. It's always a two-way. You learn and you teach in a teaching situation. So really important to understand the lens and mindset that we're coming in with. And if we've done something the same way for so long, it's really hard for us to change. We have to make a concerted effort, but we can, but we have to want to do it. And so that's my initial message. And I'm going to close with this too, because we got to start thinking this way. We got to start looking at the world this way. And so as a teacher learner, I think that we're in a good time. We're in a good time for change. So next slide, please. So this structural readiness, I'm not going to speak much more on this. I opened with this, the idea of what it means to Indigenous Services Canada in sort of the project dollars that they provide for us to allow us to engage in these kinds of initiatives. So they support this capacity and governance development to strengthen our negotiations. I would like to chime into the comments made in the prior slide. Sure, go ahead.
Hi. This is Albert. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you, Albert?
Doing all right. I just wanted to make a quick comment on the prior slide before moving forward. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, so with great acknowledgement that yes, indeed, the statistics about changing one's perspectives and seeing things in a lens, like cognitive behavioral shifts of focus work, predominantly for people. However, I just wanted to say that it seems to be that it's more difficult for certain types of people across the planet. Mainly, I'm looking at feminist theory or, non-binary folks, Indigenous to the planet, like in different places of the planet. And also, of course, women, like in general. So there are certain realities when you mix in faith-based hijabis, cloaked completely, that prevent what you were mentioning one can easily achieve if you change your focus and see the glass full empty or full, half full. So I just politely disagree that this is not achievable for many reasons in today's systems of structural colonialism that's deeply rooted in business and politics and schools that do prevent a favorable outcome for some targeted marginalized peoples. And whatever that person does is not going to change the system or the outcome, because that's the oppressive colonial structures in place in the processes of a building in the West predominantly.
I would like to thank you for your comments. And yes, I know that depending on your circumstances, depending on the environment you live in, sometimes these changes systems are not as readily changeable at all. And so it depends on where you are and the place you're at. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't dream this. And I know it makes it harder, and it is harder. And so I want to thank you for your comments and acknowledge that in those places, under these kinds of circumstances, this is the reality. And so maybe change is not possible at this time. So when that happened to our people with residential school systems and colonialism, a lot of people went underground and practiced internally and didn't show that side to the world because they would be punished for it. So at this point, I am telling you where we are in First Nations, where we are in Canada, and it's not true for everywhere. Next slide, please. So when we talk about, ISK also has this partnership relationships, building relationships, and they support the establishment and advancement of agreements with provinces and provincial school boards to improve outcomes and coordination of smooth transition between First Nations and provincial schools. This is important in a lot of First Nations communities because, for example, at Six Nations, we do not have high schools. Our students are all bussed out to grades 9 through 12. We don't have high schools in our community, and we have to go into provincial schools. Our students have to, unless, of course, you're in a language school. Six Nations does have a language school that goes from kindergarten to grade, pre-kindergarten to grade 12. And the first graduates graduated a couple of years ago and are doing extremely well. They've done extremely well when going to universities and being accepted, and are performing better than students who transition, because many of our students drop out at grade 9 because they just aren't willing or able to cope with the provincial system. So there's a lot of work to be done, and in education and in systems. And some people in the Yukon and in Northwest Territories don't even have reserves, or they don't have, they're working on claim agreements, and they, all their students go to provincial schools. They don't have their own schools. So the diversity, when I talk about we're all different, I mean, the conditions and circumstances really are different. And you need to know what you're talking about specifically to be able to make, you know, some comments about where progress has been made and what it looks like. And so that's a story we have to tell. These are the stories we have to be open to and listen to. And there are many, 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 they're all different. So I'm not knowing why we're, structural readiness, that's just the topics of what we did. We talked about that in the opening remarks. Next slide, please. Okay, so responding to education recommendations from this is the relationship building. Reconciliation calls to action. They're important. Lead to development of new approaches, tuition and education delivery, create better linkages between elementary and secondary systems on reserves, early childhood program, labor market programs through partnerships involving federal and provincial departments. Next slide, please. So these are what the Indigenous Services Canada is looking through for their program in partnerships and building them. So our First Nations Education Administrators Association strategic approach to partnerships, we support goals and objectives of the strategic plan, and they are aligned with the vision, mission, and values of our organization. We look at building long-term relationships. We have 5-year funding for specific program or activities. And part of that is our professional development webinar or courses. That's capacity building. Priority areas for partnership include certification. We're developing certification programs, so those who are on reserve and want to become certified, and as education administrators, they'll be able to do so. We have professional development workshops. We have about 8 finished now that will be ready starting in May to go. We'll have a schedule out in May. So you can look, but you can also have customized courses. Membership includes a wide range of corporate members who fund conference activities such as dinners, entertainment, guest speakers, awards. They help us and they support us. Next slide, please. So also in partnerships, the board has approved a partnership strategy, a plan and policy for implementation. And Indigenous Services Canada has project funding for structural readiness and partnership advancement. We have agreements with them, and we they fund us directly now that we have a funding authority to be able to do that. So we're very delighted with that opportunity. So they're a partner with us. And so is Assembly of First Nations, because we were formed from them. And then we're beginning discussions and partnerships with these organizations and they came to us. We haven't started going out yet, but we will. And I think in May next year, we're in a position to be able to do that. We're very new. We're a new organization. We've only been operational a year, 2.5 years now. And so, I've been here about 1.5 years. So we've just begun this journey together. And we're doing remarkably well with the kind of support we have. And but these are the things, the partnerships and building together to allow us to do this good work. Next slide, please. So our existing environment, the Prime Minister made a statement at the United Nations in September. That's one thing we want to talk about, because that's the existing environment we're in right now. And we want to talk about the global pandemic because that's the environment we're in right now. And we want to talk about reconciliation because we have legislation around this now. And lots of people are working on this. It's very important. So next slide, please. And I'd like to acknowledge the speaker who, Albert, who brought the comments and just said that, you know, that's not our reality, and every country has a different reality. Every province has a different reality. Every, you know, city is going to have a different reality depending on the people and the positions and the approach of that country or that nation or that city. So it's, like I said, these are big challenges. They're not easy things, but we can't make change if we don't know how to begin to do it. And we can't, there are ways, and we're in a position now in Canada and with First Nations to do something. And so, because Prime Minister Trudeau, his address said, our efforts to include new investments to close the gap in First Nations education and new education agreements that recognize the power and authority of First Nations communities, that's what we want. He said, these agreements recognize First Nations authority to develop and implement controls education systems run in communities, by communities, and for communities. The Prime Minister said this in 2017 on the United Nations Forum. These are his statements. He also said this means a new relationship between the Government of Canada and Indigenous peoples, a relationship based on recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. And I wanted you to know this, because when you write things up, use this, because it is a fact, and it is the approach that has been taken with legislation policy at the national level, and it's filtering down to local levels. Next slide, please. So that's one environmental reality. Another is the COVID global pandemic statistics. I changed this to as of March 14, and I was astounded by the increase in numbers just since January. Unbelievable changes. So now the world has 460 million cases of COVID-19 and 6 million deaths. That's unbelievable when we look at that reality, but that is the reality. And in Canada, as of March 14, 2022, there are 3.38 million cases of COVID-19 and 327 deaths. Unbelievable. I just shake my head because these numbers have grown significantly since January 2022. First Nations, March 14, 90,158 cases of COVID on First Nations reserves and 681 deaths. The COVID-19 case fatality rate among First Nations people living on reserves is 73% of the case fatality rate in the general Canadian population. So this is a priority for the federal government also, this global pandemic, and it is impacting our communities, and our people are dying across this country. I couldn't believe it. 681 deaths. Our population really for Indigenous peoples, and that's Inuit, Métis, and First Nations, is like 1.5 million. And I mean, about 1 million are, just a little over 1 million are First Nations. And so when we look at that, our communities are suffering, and we have to pay attention, and they have to deal with this reality. We're dealing with it right now. Next slide, please. Reconciliation. It's a relationship that's healing, has a healing process requiring public truth sharing, apology, and commemoration that acknowledges and redresses past harms. It requires constructive action on addressing the ongoing legacies of colonialism that have had destructive impacts on Aboriginal peoples' education, cultures, languages, health, child welfare, administrative justice, and economic opportunities. And you're going to find the terminology changing all the time. You know, it used to be when we talk to people in our communities, we talk about natives, you know, and or who we are, a Mohawk, for example, if we're talking about me. But Aboriginal people is the Constitution's definition. You know, in our 1982 Constitution, the Aboriginal peoples. And then just recently, as the Department of Indian Affairs and Northern Development Canada split into two, Indigenous Services Canada and the, I can't remember the other department with, what's it called? Indigenous Services, and it's about relationships. And partnerships. So those with two new departments, we're now known as Indigenous peoples again, back to a clump instead of First Nations. We were just getting that distinction going really well, and now we're back clumped together as Indigenous again. And so we're fighting an old battle. So it's constant vigilance in changing who we are and how we engage and how we relate. But reconciliation requires support of Aboriginal peoples, cultural revitalization, and integrating Indigenous knowledge systems, oral histories, laws, protocols, and connections to the land into that reconciliation process. So it's part of reconciliation. So in the terminology, we have to use it as it fits the circumstance. That's why you're going to hear me using different terms. And it requires a substantial investment of resources and sustained public education and dialogue. We have to educate the public about us because most people don't know anything about us, about First Nations. And I think that they don't know our oral histories, our laws, our protocols. They don't know any of that. And the federal government is required to give us an investment of resources to help us do that. So we need to keep that in the back of our mind and use that. It's time to give voice to First Nations, to empower them to lead the way forward for First Nations and their communities. So it is our time in Canada. And so I just wanted to bring this to your attention. Next slide, please, as a circumstance that we live with. So our vision, mission, and value statements for our organization. I love our vision. We have to balance the interconnectedness in education. That's rooted in First Nations languages, our cultures, our traditions, and self-determination under our First Nations control of First Nations education. So how fortunate is this organization to have that as their vision of where they want to go and who they want to be. Our mission, what we do, we're a gathering place for First Nations education administrators to share information, to collect and share ideas and enhance capacity in education, certification, professional development, partnerships, systems development, services, mentoring, and conferences. So these are places, this is what our job is. And so our values, this is wonderful. Our values, FNI is committed to values associated in the teachings of our members' nations. So whatever values you have in your nation, thank you, Simon, so much for reminding me. I've got to get moving here. So whatever we have, it's based on our place of where we come from and where we're rooted, because the traditions come from the land and how we fit there. Example, in the Arctic, I've been up there on a tour, and I want you to know there are no trees. There are no trees. There is ice, and you think that that snow is even. I want you to know it is not even. It is up and down. It is, you know, I went on a ride with huskies and on a sled, and it is bumpy. It's up and down. There's so many different colors of white, and you stop and build an igloo right there out of snow and ice. And so that, oh, thank you for that, Trina. You're right. I'm going to talk about that in my end slide. I'm just saying what I gave to you were the commitments made by the Prime Minister. And are they doing all that? No, they're not. They have, you know, I mean, and are all of the people working on that? No, but we'll see that later. So let's keep going. I'm just painting a picture of what was said and what was promised. Are we there? No, we're not there. We're still fighting. We got to change the mindset of Indigenous Service Canada and the relationship department also. Next slide, please. Oh, we already did this one. Next slide, please. Okay, our certification. I'm not spending a lot of time on this. We've already talked about that. Next slide, please. Yeah, Trina, no, I totally agree with you. So I just wanted you to be aware that this is just painting the scene of what's supposed to be happening. Is it? No, it never is. It's never enough. But we have to be mindful that those promises are made, and we have to hold them to the fire. And so our membership has grown. We now have 84 regular members. Regular members are people who sign up. Corporate members are people who have made a commitment to us to support us in many different ways. So that's 105 members we have now. Remember, we're a year and a half old. So this is phenomenal growth. And we're getting support whenever we go out with our products, our courses, and teach. They're all about getting back to being First Nation, you know, and taking control of education. So people are coming to our courses, and there was such high demand last year that we're finishing this year. It's just been incredible. So we're beginning to build. Next slide, please. These are just the different memberships from the different provinces. Mainly in Ontario, we got lots of work to do. And mainly women, we got lots of work to do. Next slide, please. These are different corporate memberships. You can look at them later. I want to thank our corporate members. We think you're amazing, and thank you for your support. Next slide, please. These are all going to be online. You'll be able to see them next. Thank you these are all new people, and we just got a new membership with the Governor General's office. So we're very excited about that. Getting support from these organizations help grow us and help us become. Next slide, please. So we want to focus on the long term. We want people to renew. It's a place, the member benefits, place to gather and build networks. It's access to professional training, certification services, participation in national gatherings, special events, access to high quality resources, tools, and templates, sharing knowledge and experiences. That's what we're about. Next slide, please. Making connections and building relations with First Nations learners, parents, teachers, education administrators. Majority of First Nations learners are in provincial territory schools. How many First Nations are on provincial territory school boards? How do you work with First Nations to promote self-determination? Oh, it's the Rideau Hall Foundation. Okay, that's still, Rideau Hall Foundation is still connected to the Governor General. how many First Nations are provincial territory school boards, how you work with First Nations and promote self-determination and control of First Nations education. Working together is mandatory, not just desirable. We all have to help each other. We have to hold each other up. And if we do it together, we'll make more progress. Long-term relationships will take time and ongoing interaction. It's not easy. Next slide, please. We want to cultivate transformation. We want to move from the Indian Act, administration of education, to inherent right self-governance of education, our way. We want to educate and train staff to engage in local community people in nation building discussions and activities, obtain vision and mandate for change from the community, and provide ongoing continuous support for transformation activities. Next slide, please. So phases of First Nations sovereignty. Well, and before pre-contact, we had the laws from the Creator. Sovereignty was supreme power and authority. We made our own laws, our own decisions. We were independent and we were accountable to the people. With contact at the beginning, there were alliances, there was desire for land, there was treaties, there are numbered treaties, there's nation-to-nation relationships. And then over time, it became a policy of assimilation with Indian reserves, Indian Act, residential schools, wards of the states, and dependency. Next slide, please. And so now, next slide, please. We want to take control of First Nations education. So no one knows what it was like at pre-contact. No one was there. We can only imagine in our minds what it might look like. And remember, change is the only constant in our universe. That's what the elders have taught us. And with contact, there was treaties, and then with assimilation. So now with self-governance and First Nations control and implementation of that, we have to remember who we were. And we go back to our communities and to our elders and to our people to do that. And because our story is, you know, our story at even Tyendinaga, Bay of Quinte Mohawks, and the story of 6'8", they're different stories. And so you have to know that. And it's based on tradition, although there's many commonalities with the Mohawks, but there's differences too. So we have to imagine it and reimagine it, and then decide as a people in the community. And we have to tell our stories as we grew up, because that's what we remember. That's who we were. And so that's what we have to do. Next slide, please. And so we need a paradigm shift by the federal government in their thinking, in their mindset. The vision of the future, First Nations people see themselves as self-sufficient, autonomous, and significant contributors to society. The federal government needs to transform and change its Indian policy and its mindset, because it's doing things the same way it's always done. The minute they think there's a new program, they've got it all developed and ready to go. We know it doesn't work. We've had hundreds of years showing us it doesn't work. It's not for us. It's not the way forward. So we do have a major battle, a major job to get them to change their minds. You don't create programs for us. We create our own programs, and we use customs and traditions from our community, from our nation, from our elders, from our wise people. There are many in our communities. We just have to go home. We just have to talk with them. We just have to, each 648 nations, you need to talk to your people. And you need to let us do it. Don't you worry about that. You just provide the money and begin helping us implement. You just need to follow our direction now. So the current environment nationally and internationally provides support for transformation in relationships between the state and Indigenous peoples, and that's with the United Nations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Canadian Constitution. Next slide, please. So there are 3 articles in the United Nations Declaration, and Canada has passed this. They have accepted the United Nations Declaration and promised to implement it. Article 3, Indigenous peoples have the right to self-determination. They freely determine their political status and freely pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. Article 4, Indigenous peoples have the right to autonomy or self-government in matters relating to internal and local affairs, as well as ways and means for financing their autonomous functions. So government has to fund it. Article 14, Indigenous peoples have the right to establish and control their educational systems and institutions, providing education in their own languages in a manner appropriate to their cultural methods of teaching and learning. Next slide, please. 2 minutes. So this is the last slide. I'm so glad I finished on time almost. Your stories. We want to hear from you today. We want to know, what are your needs? What are your priorities and challenges? And I think that it's really important, as we move forward, we're going to provide opportunities to do this. We're going to provide platforms and have discussions at regional levels where we can just talk about one topic together and have that conversation and explore the difficulties we're encountering and listen to what other people are doing, because other First Nations education administrators, directors of education are on the same journey. We already have legislation that allows us to take control of education agreements. We got a course on that. And and negotiating those agreements with your regional officials, we got a course on that too. And so is it easy? Nope. Are they doing it? Are the ISC officials doing it the way, following all the rules? No, everybody has a different interpretation. Everybody's looking at it differently. So we gotta be in the know so that when we're negotiating, we can have the right tools and the right questions to ask. So from education authorities, from communities, Manitoba, BC, and New Brunswick, I wanna say Nyago for giving me the opportunity to say these words to you. If you have questions, please send us an email. Nyago.